It was just past 6 a.m. when I placed the small, inconspicuous envelope at her pristine white door. The air was crisp, the kind of cool that carried secrets like whispers. No one was awake yet, not in Sunset Ridge, not even Susan Whitmore. But 5 minutes later, her scream pierced through the peaceful neighborhood like a siren of shame. I didn't flinch. I didn't run. I just watched from my porch, holding my coffee cup with both hands, as Susan fell to her knees in her silk robe, clutching the contents of the envelope like a woman whose perfect world had shattered. Her hair was wild, her face pale. She looked human for the first time in years. Funny how the truth does that to people. My name is Evelyn Carter. For 30 years, I've lived in the same house on Maple Avenue in Willow Creek, Virginia, a postcard town with its red brick buildings, white picket fences, and secrets buried beneath perfectly manicured lawns. I used to be somebody here. I taught English at Willow Creek High for 27 years before retiring. I shaped young minds, introduced teenagers to Shakespeare and Austen, and watched them grow into adults who occasionally wave at me in the grocery store. My husband. Tom and I bought this house when we were newlyweds. We'd planned to fill it with children, but life had other ideas. Instead, we filled it with books, plants, and the quiet contentment of two people who found in each other exactly what they needed. 6 years ago, pancreatic cancer took Tom in just 4 months, quick and cruel. I went from wife to widow before I could fully comprehend what was happening. The neighbors brought casseroles and sympathy cards. Some meant it. Others performed the expected social rituals before returning to their lives. Susan Whitmore did both with theatrical precision. "Oh, Evelyn," she'd said at Tom's funeral, her manicured hand resting on my shoulder, just long enough for someone to notice. "If there's anything, and I mean anything, I can do, you just call." Me. I never called. She never expected me to. Susan lives 2 houses down in a sprawling colonial with columns that seem to stand a little taller than necessary. Her husband, Rick Whitmore, became mayor 3 years ago, and since then, Susan has worn her title of First Lady of Willow Creek like a crown. She chairs every committee, organizes every fundraiser, and ensures everyone knows it. Perhaps I should have seen it coming. The small slights that grew larger, the invitations that arrived late or not at all, the way conversations would stop when I approached a group at the community center. But I was too busy learning how to exist in a world without Tom to notice I was being systematically erased from my own community. Until the Maple Square Harvest Festival last Saturday, it's the biggest event of our little town's calendar. Everyone attends, families with children in strollers, teenagers pretending to be bored while secretly enjoying themselves, and seniors who've attended every festival for decades. The maple trees blaze orange and red. Food stalls sell everything from apple cider donuts to barbecue, and local artists display their work. For 30 years, I'd contributed to this festival. I judged the high school essay contest, helped set up the book exchange, and for the past 5 years, I'd baked my blueberry pies for the bake sale. Small contributions, perhaps, but they were mine. This year, Susan was the chairperson of the festival committee. I should have taken that as a warning. The day was perfect, crisp autumn air, golden sunlight, and the scent of cinnamon and wood smoke. I arrived early, carrying 2 freshly baked pies to the community table. Margaret, who'd run the bake sale for 15 years, looked uncomfortable as I approached. "Oh, Evelyn, I'm so sorry. Didn't you get my email? We have a new system this year. All baked goods needed to be registered in advance for health code reasons." I hadn't received any email. "I see. Well, these are just my usual blueberry pies. You know I've been bringing them for years." Margaret wouldn't meet my eyes. "I know, but Susan was very clear about the new protocol. Maybe you could just take them home and enjoy them yourself?" I stood there, pies in hand, feeling strangely exposed. "Of course, no problem." As I turned to leave, Susan appeared, elegant in a burgundy sweater and camel slacks, her blonde hair swept into a perfect chignon. "Evelyn, you made it." "Oh, are those your pies? Such a shame about the new regulations. Safety first, though, right? I'm sure they're delicious. You'll have to save me a slice sometime." She didn't mean it. We both knew she didn't mean it. I took my pies home, left them on the kitchen counter, and returned to the festival. I wouldn't let her win so easily. The afternoon progressed with the usual activities: children's races, music from the high school band, and craft demonstrations. Then came the ceremonial presentation, the moment when the community traditionally gave the mayor a gift to symbolize their appreciation. Susan took the microphone, her voice carrying across the square. Ladies and gentlemen, as chairperson of this year's festival, it is my honor to present our beloved Mayor Whitmore with a token of our community's esteem. Rick stepped forward, waving to the crowd with practiced humility. Susan unveiled a bottle of wine wrapped in gold ribbon. A 1985 Chateau Margaux, she announced, a rare vintage for a rare leader. May it represent the excellence and distinction you bring to our town. Applause erupted. Ricky accepted the gift with a speech about service and community that sounded rehearsed but sincere enough. Then Susan's eyes found me in the crowd. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. And now, I'd like to recognize someone who has been part of our community for many years. Evelyn Carter, would you please join me? Confused but curious, I made my way to the front. People stepped aside, some looking uncomfortable, others simply curious. Evelyn has been with us for, well, longer than some of us can remember, Susan said, drawing a chuckle from the crowd. And today, on behalf of the festival committee, I'd like to present her with this. From behind her back, she produced a plain brown paper bag. It was slightly wrinkled, as if it had been stuffed in a pocket and forgotten. For your contributions, she said, her voice honeyed but her eyes cold. I took the bag, feeling its lightness. Opening it, I found nothing, just air, an empty bag. The silence stretched for one beat, then two. Someone coughed. A child asked, too loudly, "Mommy, why did the lady get nothing?" Susan's smile never faltered. "Oh dear," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "It seems there's been a mix-up. Well, as they say, it's the thought that counts." Laughter rippled through the crowd, uncomfortable, confused, but laughter nonetheless. I stood there, holding an empty paper bag, my cheeks burning. "Thank you," I managed to say, though I'm not sure why. Then I walked away, back straight, eyes forward, the empty bag clutched in my hand like it contained something precious. It didn't. But what I would put in an envelope for Susan the next morning, that contained something very precious indeed. The truth. Truth is a strange creature. It can lie dormant for years, curled up in the corners of a community, in filing cabinets, in whispered conversations, in glances exchanged when certain names are mentioned. In Willow Creek, truth hibernated comfortably beneath layers of politeness and tradition. I had never considered myself its keeper. I was just Evelyn, the English teacher turned widow, the woman who kept her garden neat and her opinions to herself. But that night, after the festival, as I sat in my kitchen staring at the 2 untouched blueberry pies, something shifted inside me. The humiliation I'd felt standing on that stage with an empty bag in my hands crystallized into something harder, something with edges. Not hate. I've never had the energy for hate, but clarity. The kind that comes when you finally see a pattern that's been forming right in front of you for years. I went to my study, a small room off the living room that Tom had painted the color of sea glass one summer. The antique desk in the corner had been my grandmother's, its drawers, filled with memories and forgotten papers. But in the bottom drawer, locked with a small key I kept in my jewelry box, was a file I hadn't opened in years. 3 years ago, before Rick Whitmore became mayor, he'd been involved in a zoning scandal. A parcel of land meant for a community garden had mysteriously been rezoned for commercial use, then sold to a developer who happened to be Rick's college roommate. The whole thing had been quietly resolved. The developer backed out, the land reverted to the town, and Rick made a public apology blaming a clerical error. I was on the school board at the time, which had tangential involvement because the garden was supposed to include an educational component for the high school. I'd received copies of all the correspondence, the original zoning, documents, the amendments, the emails between Rick and the developer discussing how to make this happen quietly. I had kept them, not out of malice or foresight, but because I'm the kind of person who keeps things. Tom used to tease me about it. "Evie," he'd say, "your filing system is one step away from being featured on a show about hoarders." But those papers weren't all I had. There was also the matter of the Homeowners Association funds. As the treasurer for 2 years following Tom's death, a position I took to keep myself busy, I had noticed discrepancies. Small at first, a few $100s here and there for miscellaneous maintenance or administrative costs, then larger sums for consulting fees to companies that, when I researched them, seemed to exist only on paper. When I brought my concerns to the board, Susan, who was president, had patted my hand and said, "Evelyn, dear, you've been through so much. Why don't you let me handle the financial aspects? Numbers can be so confusing when one is emotionally vulnerable. I resigned the next day, but not before making copies of the financial records. Another set of papers filed away, not out of vengeance, but out of a teacher's instinct that someday someone might need to know. And finally, there was Linda Grace. Sweet, soft-spoken Linda, who owned the wine shop on Main Street where Tom and I used to go for tastings on our anniversary. Last year, after one too many glasses of a lovely rosé, she'd confided in me that Susan had been pressuring her to donate expensive wines for town events. Not just asking, Evelyn! Threatening! Linda's voice had dropped to a whisper even though we were alone in the back room of her shop. She implied she could make things difficult with my business license renewal if I didn't contribute appropriately to the community. Her words, not mine. I had recorded our conversation, accidentally at first. I'd been using my phone to take notes on wines to try later, and the voice memo function had still been running. I discovered it the next day and almost deleted it, but something stopped me. Perhaps the same instinct that made me keep those other papers. Now, sitting at my grandmother's desk in the quiet of my house, I spread it all out before me. Documents, bank statements, the transcript I'd made of Linda's recording. It was all there, a pattern of small corruptions, of power wielded like a scalpel, precise and cutting. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I made copies, organized everything chronologically, highlighted the most damning sections. I wrote no accusatory note, added no angry explanation. The facts would speak for themselves. As dawn broke, I placed everything in a large manila envelope. On the front, I wrote simply, Truth, the walk. To Susan's house took less than 3 minutes. The neighborhood was silent, caught in that liminal space between night and day when the world holds its breath. Susan and Rick's colonial loomed large, its windows dark, its occupants still sleeping the sleep of the righteous, or at least, those who believe themselves to be. I placed the envelope on the doorstep, propped against the door where it couldn't be missed. Then I returned home, made a pot of coffee, and took my mug out to the porch. My rocking chair, old, comfortable, slightly creaky, faced in the direction of the Whitmore's house, and I waited. The scream, when it came, was everything I hadn't allowed myself to imagine. It started low, almost a gasp, then rose in pitch and volume until it seemed to bounce off the trees and houses, echoing through our quiet neighborhood. It went on, a sustained note of shock and rage and something else. Fear, perhaps. Doors opened. Lights came on. Mrs. Patterson from across the street emerged in her bathrobe, her face creased with concern. And there was Susan, on her knees on her pristine porch, the contents of my envelope scattered around her like fallen leaves. Her silk robe, pale, blue, probably expensive, pooled around her. Her hair, freed from its usual perfect styling, hung in her face. She looked undone. Our eyes met across the distance between our houses. For a moment, just a moment, I saw recognition in her gaze. Not of me, Evelyn, her neighbor of 30 years, but of what I had done, what I knew. Then she scrambled to gather the papers, clutching them to her chest as she staggered back inside, slamming the door behind her. Mrs. Patterson looked from Susan's house to mine, confusion evident on her face. I lifted my coffee mug in a small salute and took a sip. The coffee was perfect. Strong, hot, and satisfying, like the truth. The next morning dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself was oblivious to the storm brewing in our quiet neighborhood. I slept better than I had in years, dreamless and deep. When I finally came downstairs, the 2 blueberry pies were still on my kitchen counter. I cut a slice, made some tea, and carried both out to my front porch. The neighborhood was buzzing with unusual activity for a Sunday morning. Small clusters of people gathered on sidewalks, their voices low but urgent. Mrs. Patterson was making her way from house to house like a bee pollinating flowers, stopping to share whatever information she had collected. Officer Jeremy Knox's police cruiser was parked in front of the Whitmore's house. Not an emergency response, just a routine visit, his lights off, his posture casual as he stood on their porch. But the fact that he was there at all spoke volumes. I sipped my tea and waited. It didn't take long. By noon, my doorbell rang. I knew who it would be before I opened the door. "Miss C?" Jeremy said, removing his cap. His sandy hair was cut short, his face still boyish despite the badge and uniform. "Got a minute to talk?" I'd taught Jeremy American literature his junior year. He'd struggled with Steinbeck, but had written a surprisingly insightful paper on the yellow wallpaper. Now, at EO. 32, he was Willow Creek's most respected police officer, known for his fairness and discretion. Of course, Jeremy. Tea? Coffee? Pie? Just water would be fine, ma'am. I led him into my living room, where books lined the walls and Tom's old armchair still sat by the window, untouched since his death. Jeremy perched awkwardly on the edge of the sofa, his hat in his hands. I'm guessing. This isn't a social call, I said, handing him a glass of water. No, ma'am. He took a sip, choosing his words carefully. There's been some allegations made about Mayor Whitmore and his wife, financial irregularities with the HOA, potential ethics violations. Mrs. Whitmore seems to think you might have some information about it. Does she now? I settled into Tom's chair, feeling the worn leather conform to my shape. And what exactly did Susan say? Jeremy shifted uncomfortably. She said, and I'm quoting here, that you're trying to destroy her family with fabricated documents because of some petty grievance. She said you delivered an envelope of slander to her door this morning. I see. I folded my hands in my lap. And what do you think, Jeremy? He looked up, surprised by the question. Ma'am? You've known me for what, 15 years? Do I strike you as someone who fabricates documents over petty grievances? A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. No, ma'am. You were always the teacher who gave fair grades, even when we didn't deserve them. I gave the grades you earned, I corrected gently. Nothing more, nothing less. Jeremy nodded, then leaned forward, his voice dropping even though we were alone. Miss C, whatever's going on here, it's bigger than you might realize. Mrs. Whitmore is threatening to sue for defamation. The mayor's talking about an investigation into who leaked confidential town business. They're scared, I said simply. Yes, ma'am, they are. He hesitated. Do you actually have evidence of wrongdoing? I rose and went to the small secretary desk in the corner of the room. From the drawer, I removed a second manila envelope, identical to the one I'd left at Susan's door, but thicker. This is everything I gave to Susan, plus additional documentation I've collected over the years. Bank statements, email correspondence, meeting minutes where decisions were made that never appeared in the official record. I handed it to him. I kept it because Tom always said knowledge was its own kind of insurance. Jeremy took the envelope with the reverence of someone handling something fragile and valuable. Miss C, if this is what I think it is, it's the truth, Jeremy. Nothing more, nothing less. I sat back down. What you do with it is up to you. I'm not looking to punish anyone. I just wanted Susan to know that I see her, that her actions have consequences. He stared at the envelope for a long moment, then tucked it carefully inside his jacket. I'll look into it, properly, by the book. I know you will. I smiled at him, remembering the earnest teenager who'd once asked me if he could rewrite his essay on Gatsby because he'd missed the whole point the first time around. You always were thorough. Jeremy stood, placing his cap back on his head. Miss C, just be careful, okay? The Whitmores have a lot of friends in this town. So do I said, though I wasn't entirely sure if that was true anymore. So do I. After Jeremy left, I spent the afternoon in my garden. There's something soothing about getting your hands in the soil, about pruning away dead growth, to make room for new life. The rhythmic snip of my shears, the scent of earth and green things, the gentle hum of bees among my lavender, it all helped settle the strange energy that had been buzzing through me since the festival. Around 4 o'clock, a shadow fell across my flower bed. I looked up to find Linda Grace standing at the edge of my garden, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold, though the day was warm. Evelyn, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Can we talk? Linda looked different from the last time I'd seen her. Smaller somehow, her shoulders hunched, her eyes darting nervously to the street and back. Her wine shop had been a fixture on Main Street for nearly a decade, a cozy space with wooden shelves and a small tasting bar in the back where she hosted events. Of course. I stripped off my gardening gloves and led her to the 2 Adirondack chairs on the lawn. Is everything all right? She laughed, a hollow sound with no humor in it. No, not even close. She twisted her hands in her lap. Susan called me this morning. She was hysterical, demanding to know what I'd told you about the wine donations. My heart sank. Linda, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to drag you into this. But you did. Her voice was flat. You used our conversation, a private conversation between friends, as some kind of weapon. The accusation stung, partly because there was truth to it. It wasn't meant as a weapon. It was meant as evidence. Evidence? Her eyes widened. Evelyn, do you have any idea what you've done? The Whitmores could ruin me. They could ruin all of us. Or maybe it's time someone stood up to them, I said quietly. Linda shook her head, her expression a mixture of fear and disbelief. Easy for you to say. You're retired. You have nothing to lose. My business, my livelihood, it's all on the line. Her words cut deep. Was that how people saw me now? A bitter widow with nothing to lose? Linda, I never meant... It doesn't matter what. You meant? She stood abruptly. Susan is on the warpath. She's calling everyone, demanding to know who's on her side. And Rick is talking about auditing business licenses for compliance issues. Her voice broke on the last words. I can't afford to be caught in the middle of this. I rose too, reaching for her hand, but she pulled away. I understand, I said, though the words tasted like ash. I truly never intended to put you at risk. Linda looked at me then, really looked at me, her eyes searching mine. What did she do to you, Evelyn? What could possibly be worth all this? The question caught me off guard. What had Susan done, really? Given me an empty bag? Excluded me from committees? Whispered about me behind my back? In the grand scheme of things, were these offenses worth the storm I'd unleashed? But then I remembered Susan's smile as she handed me that empty bag, the calculated cruelty of the gesture, the way she'd systematically worked to erase me from the community I'd helped build over 3 decades. She made me invisible, I said finally, and I refused to disappear. Linda held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded once, a quick, sharp movement. Well, you're certainly visible now. She turned to go, then paused. For what it's worth, I hope you know what you're doing. As I watched her walk away, I wondered if I did. The truth was a pebble I'd dropped into still water, and the ripples were spreading farther and faster than I'd anticipated. I'd wanted Susan to know I saw her. I hadn't fully considered who else might be caught in the wake. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In houses all around me, lights were coming on, families were gathering for dinner, conversations were happening, and I knew with absolute certainty that in many of those conversations, my name was being spoken. For better or worse, I was no longer invisible. Monday morning arrived with an uncomfortable sense of anticipation, like the air before a thunderstorm. I went about my usual routine, coffee, toast, crossword puzzle, but couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. By 10 o'clock, my phone had rung 3 times. First, Margaret from the bake sale committee, her voice cautious but kind, asking if I was all right and did I need anything. She didn't mention Susan or the envelope directly, but her concern spoke volumes. Then Mrs. Patterson, less subtle in her approach. Evelyn, dear, the whole neighborhood is talking. Is it true you have dirt on the Whitmores? Mildred says her son-in-law works at the bank, and he's heard there's something fishy with the HOA accounts. I deflected gently, unwilling to feed the gossip mill, but Mrs. Patterson was undeterred. Well, just so you know, not everyone's on their side. That Susan has been lording it over all of us for years. About time someone stood up to her. The third call was from the Willow Creek Gazette, our local newspaper. A young reporter named Alyssa Chen, who couldn't have been more than 25, asked for a comment on the alleged financial improprieties involving Mayor Whitmore's administration. I politely declined, suggested she speak with Officer Knox if she was pursuing a legitimate story, and hung up. It was happening faster than I'd expected. The truth, once released, had taken on a life of its own. Around noon, I decided to walk to the post office, partly to mail a birthday card to my niece in Richmond, but mostly because I needed fresh air and movement to clear my head. The 4-block walk took me through the heart of Willow Creek, past the small shops and cafes that had been the backdrop of my life for 3 decades. I felt eyes on me as I walked. Curious glances from the barista at Maple Street Coffee, a long look from Mr. Chen restocking produce outside his grocery store, a nod of acknowledgement from the librarian watering flowers outside the public library. News. Traveled fast in Willow Creek, and I was now undeniably news. At the post office, I joined the short line at the counter. 2 people ahead of me stood Rick Whitmore himself, wearing his usual navy blazer with the town pin on the lapel. He was chatting with the postal clerk, his voice carrying that practiced political cadence, friendly but not too familiar, authoritative but not intimidating. I considered leaving, coming back later, but something kept me rooted to the spot. I hadn't done anything wrong. I had no reason to hide. Rick turned, package in hand, and saw me. His smile flickered but remained in place, a professional reflex. "Evelyn," he said with a nod. "Mayor Whitmore," I replied, my voice steady. He hesitated, clearly debating whether to continue past me or stop and engage. Decision made, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I think we should talk, don't you? I'm not sure what we have to discuss." His smile tightened. "I think you know exactly what we need to discuss. Not here, though." He glanced around at the curious onlookers. "My office? 3 o'clock?" It wasn't really a question. In 30 years of living in Willow Creek, I'd never once been invited to the mayor's office. "I'll be there," I said. The mayor's office occupied the second floor of our town hall, a stately brick building that had once been a courthouse. Rick's secretary, a middle-aged woman named Diane who sang in the Methodist church choir, looked up with surprise when I entered. "Mrs. Carter," she said, standing, "the mayor is expecting you. Go right in." Rick's office was exactly what you'd expect from a small-town mayor. Wood-paneled walls, a large desk with family photos, framed certificates, and a window overlooking Maple Square. He stood as I entered, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "Thank you for coming, Evelyn. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee?" "No, thank you." I sat, arranging my purse in my lap. "You wanted to talk?" Rick sighed, settling back into his leather chair. Up close, I could see the strain around his eyes, the slight dishevelment of his usually impeccable appearance. "I think we both know why you're here. The documents you left for Susan." "Yes. Where did you get them?" "I kept copies. From when I was on the school board. From my time as HOA treasurer. Linda Grace shared concerns about being pressured for donations." I met his gaze. Steadily. "Nothing was fabricated, if that's what you're implying." He leaned forward, clasping his hands on the desk. "Evelyn, we've known each other for years. Our kids went to school together. I always respected you as a teacher. And I respected you as a parent. Less so as a mayor." The bluntness of my statement seemed to catch him off guard. He recovered quickly. "Look, I understand you might be upset about what happened at the festival. Susan can be thoughtless sometimes. But this response seems disproportionate, don't you think?" "Does it?" I adjusted my glasses, a habit when I'm thinking carefully about my words. "Tell me, Rick, was it thoughtless when Susan deliberately excluded me from community events? When she spread rumors that I was becoming forgetful? When she publicly humiliated me with an empty bag while presenting you with an expensive bottle of wine?" He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I didn't know about all of that." "I find that hard to believe." Rick sighed again, running a hand through his hair. "What do you want, Evelyn? An apology? For Susan to step down from her committees? Name it, and let's resolve this before it goes any further." The question gave me pause. What did I want? I hadn't planned beyond revealing the truth. I hadn't expected to be sitting in the mayor's office, being offered concessions. "I want accountability," I said finally. "For the HOA funds that disappeared into consulting fees for companies that don't exist. For the zoning errors that benefited your college roommate. For the way you and Susan have used your positions to bully and exclude anyone who doesn't fit into your vision of Willow Creek." Rick's expression hardened. "That's a lot of accusations, Evelyn. Accusations that would be very difficult to prove in court, I might add." "Are you threatening me with a lawsuit, Rick?" "Not at all." His smile returned, practiced and political. "I'm simply pointing out that documents can be interpreted in many ways. Conversations can be misremembered, and in a legal setting, the burden of proof would be on you." I let his words hang in the air between us, considering their implications. He was right, of course. If this became a legal battle, I would be outmatched. The Whitmores had resources, connections, and the veneer of respectability that often counts for more than truth in small towns. But I also had something they didn't. "Officer Knox has copies of everything," I said quietly. "And unlike the envelope I left for Susan, his includes the original bank statements, the ones with your signature authorizing transfers to shell companies owned by your brother-in-law." The color drained from Rick's face. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I stood, smoothing my skirt. "I taught high school English. For 27 years, Rick. I know the difference between fiction and nonfiction, between truth and lies." I picked up my purse. "The question is, do you?" As I turned to leave, Rick called after me, his voice strained. "This isn't over, Evelyn." I paused at the door, looking back over my shoulder. No, it isn't. But how it ends is largely up to you now. Walking home from town hall, I felt lighter somehow, as if revealing the truth had relieved me of a burden I hadn't realized I was carrying. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Maple Avenue, and the first hints of evening coolness touched the air. I was nearly home when I saw them. Susan and Linda Grace, standing on my front porch. Susan's posture was rigid, her arms crossed over her chest. Linda looked nervous, shifting, her weight from foot to foot. They hadn't noticed me yet. I could turn around, delay the inevitable confrontation, but I was tired of avoiding, of accommodating, of disappearing. So I continued walking, my head high, my steps steady. Whatever came next, I would face it in the light. As I approached my own home, Susan spotted me first. Her body tensed, a predator catching sight of prey. But I wasn't prey anymore. I was walking toward my own front porch, where I'd sat with Tom on summer evenings, where I'd graded papers and read books and watched the seasons change for 30 years. This was my territory. "Evelyn?" Susan called, her voice carrying that false sweetness she'd perfected over the years. "We need to talk." "So it seems," I replied, climbing the steps to join them. Up close, I could see the strain in Susan's appearance, her makeup slightly too heavy, as if trying to conceal sleeplessness, her perfectly highlighted blonde hair looking somewhat rigid from too much hairspray. Linda stood slightly apart, her hands clutched in front of her, eyes darting between us. I unlocked my front door. "Let's talk inside." My living room felt smaller with the three of us in it. Susan declined my offer of tea, perching on the edge of my sofa like she was afraid it might contaminate her designer slacks. Linda accepted gratefully, her hands wrapping around the mug as if seeking warmth despite the mild day. "I'll get right to the point," Susan said after an uncomfortable silence. "You need to retract everything. Tell Officer Knox you made a mistake. Tell the newspaper there's no story here." I settled into Tom's armchair, feeling its familiar embrace. "And why would I do that?" "Because," Susan leaned forward, dropping the sweet facade, "you're destroying lives based on incomplete information and personal grievances. Rick has devoted his life to this town. We both have. You've certainly devoted yourselves to something," I agreed mildly. "Though I'm not sure it's been the town." Susan's eyes narrowed. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Snide insinuations without context. Do you have any idea how complex municipal finances are? How many regulations we navigate daily? Of course there are consulting fees. Of course there are zoning changes. That's how towns function. And the phantom HOA vendors? The pressure on local businesses for donations? The systematic exclusion of people who question your methods? Are those also just how towns function?" Susan waved a dismissive hand. "Exaggerations and misunderstandings. Not from where I'm sitting." I took a sip of my tea, watching her over the rim of my cup. "But I'm curious. Why bring Linda into this? What's her role in today's performance?" Linda flinched, her gaze fixed on her tea. Susan's smile returned, shark-like. "Linda has something to tell you. Don't you, Linda?" The silence stretched taut as piano wire. Finally, Linda looked up, her expression a mixture of shame and resignation. "I may have exaggerated some things, Evelyn, about the wine donations, about feeling pressured. The betrayal, while not entirely unexpected, still stung." "I see. She was upset that day," Susan interjected smoothly. "The wine shop has been struggling, through no fault of her own, of course. The economy, online competition. She'd had a few glasses herself, said things she didn't mean." "Is that true, Linda?" I asked quietly. Linda couldn't meet my eyes. "The shop has been struggling, and yes, I'd been drinking that day. I might have embellished." "And the recording?" I asked, watching her closely. "Did you embellish on that too?" Linda's head snapped up, confusion written across her face. "Recording?" Susan's perfectly composed mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. "What recording?" I kept my expression neutral, though my heart pounded. I was bluffing partially. There was a recording, but it was fragmented, muffled in places. It wouldn't stand up as definitive evidence, but they didn't know that. "The voice memo that was running on my phone that day in the wine shop," I said calmly. "I discovered it later. Linda was quite specific about the donations and the threats to her business license, wasn't she?" The color drained from Linda's face. Susan's hand shot out, gripping Linda's wrist with such force that her knuckles whitened. "You never mentioned a recording," she hissed. I didn't know, Linda whispered, her eyes wide with panic. The room crackled with tension. I almost felt sorry for Linda, caught between Susan's wrath and her own conscience. Almost. You know, I said conversationally, I've been wondering why you did it, Susan. The empty bag at the festival. It was so public, so deliberately cruel. You must have known it would provoke a response. Susan released Linda's wrist, composing herself. It was a mistake, a thoughtless joke. No, I shook my head. You don't do thoughtless. Every slight, every exclusion has been calculated. So why? Why target a retired widow who's never done anything to you? Something flickered in Susan's eyes. A hint of the truth, perhaps. You think you're so innocent, don't you? The beloved teacher, the grieving widow, everyone's favorite Mrs. Carter. I never claimed to be perfect. No, but you judged us. I saw it in your eyes at every meeting, every event. The way you looked at Rick when the zoning issue happened, the way you questioned the HOA expenses, always watching, always taking notes. Her voice had risen, the careful facade cracking. People listened to you. They respected you. And you used that against us. Understanding dawned slowly. You were afraid of me. Susan scoffed, but the denial didn't reach her eyes. Don't flatter yourself. Not afraid physically, afraid of what I represented. Someone with institutional memory, someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated, someone who saw through the performance to what was underneath. This is ridiculous. Susan stood abruptly. Linda, we're leaving. Evelyn clearly isn't interested in being reasonable. Linda remained seated, her gaze shifting between us. What about the recording? She asked in a small voice. There is no recording, Susan snapped. She's bluffing. I smiled slightly. Are you sure about that, Susan? Sure enough to bet your husband's career on it? You're standing in the community? Doubt crept across Susan's face. She'd built her life on certainties, the certainty of her social position, the certainty that people would bend to her will, the certainty that appearances mattered more than reality. Now that certainty was crumbling. What do you want? She asked finally, her voice tight. The question again. What did I want? Revenge? Justice? Vindication? The truth was both simpler and more complex. I want what I've always wanted, I said. A community based on integrity rather than influence. Transparency in how decisions are made. And yes, basic human decency in how we treat each other. Susan laughed, a brittle sound. How charmingly naive. That's not how the real world works, Evelyn. Perhaps not, but it's how Willow Creek could work. I turned to Linda. You don't have to do this, you know. Whatever she's promised or threatened, it's not worth the cost to your conscience. Linda looked down at her hands, then up at Susan, whose expression had hardened into something ugly. I should go, she murmured, setting down her untouched tea. Think carefully about your next steps, Susan said to me, her voice low. This could get very unpleasant. It already has, I replied. But unlike you, I'm not afraid of the truth. After they left, I sat for a long time in the growing dusk, thinking about the lies we tell ourselves and others, about the masks we wear and the prices we pay to maintain appearances, about how the truth, once spoken, can never truly be unheard. The phone rang, startling me from my reverie. It was Jeremy. Knox. Miss C, he said without preamble. We need to talk. The bank records you gave me, they've been verified. This is serious. Really serious. I know, I said quietly. The state attorney's office is getting involved. There's going to be an investigation, a formal one. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of what was coming. I understand. Are you okay? He asked, concern evident in his voice. You've kicked one hell of a hornet's nest. I'm fine, Jeremy. Just tired. It's been a long day. After we hung up, I went to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, staring at its contents without really seeing them. I wasn't hungry, but I knew I should eat something. The 2 blueberry pies still sat on the counter, untouched since the festival. On impulse, I cut a generous slice, dolloped whipped cream on top, and carried it out to the porch. The night was clear, stars emerging one by one in the darkening sky. From somewhere down the street came the sound of children playing, their laughter carrying on the evening air. Life in Willow Creek continued, even as its foundations trembled. I took a bite of pie. It was still good, the blueberries sweet tart, the crust flaky. I had always been good at pie. Some things don't change, even when everything else does. The investigation moved with surprising speed. By Wednesday morning, state officials had arrived in Willow Creek, setting up temporary offices in the town hall. Black SUVs with government plates parked along Main Street stood out like crows among sparrows. I gave my formal statement that afternoon, sitting across from a serious young woman named Agent Tanya Rivera, who took meticulous notes and asked precise questions. Officer Knox sat in as the local liaison, his presence a silent reassurance. "You understand this will become public," Agent Rivera said as we concluded. "Once charges are filed, if they are filed, your name will be part of the record as the initial reporting party." "I understand," I said. Jeremy walked me out afterward, escorting me past the cluster of reporters that had already gathered on the town hall steps. "You don't have to talk to them," he murmured. "In fact, it's better if you don't." "I have nothing to hide," I replied, "but nothing to say either." The Willow Creek Gazette ran the story the next day. "Mayor under investigation for financial improprieties," the headline proclaimed. The article was factual, restrained, mentioning that the investigation stemmed from documents provided by a concerned citizen, but not naming me directly. The online comments section was less restrained, with speculation running wild and sides being taken. By Friday, Rick Whitmore had taken a temporary leave of absence from his mayoral duties. The deputy mayor, a retired accountant, named Harold Winters, stepped in with visible reluctance. I kept to myself during those turbulent days, declining calls from neighbors and turning away the more persistent reporters who found their way to my door. I worked in my garden, read books I'd been meaning to get to, and waited. The knock, when it came, was not unexpected, but the visitor was. Linda Grace stood on my porch, looking as if she hadn't slept in days. Her usually neat brown hair hung limp around her face, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice hoarse. I hesitated, then stepped aside. Of course. We sat in the same places as before, Linda on the sofa, me in Tom's chair. This time, when I offered tea, she shook her head. "I came to apologize," she said without preamble, "and to tell you. I've given a statement to the investigators. The full truth this time." I waited, giving her space to continue. "Susan," Linda twisted her hands in her lap. "She's been controlling this town for years. The wine donations were just the beginning. She had information on everyone, who was behind on their mortgage, whose kid got in trouble at school, which marriages were struggling, and she used it. All. How did you get caught in her web?" I asked gently. Linda's laugh was hollow. "My brother had a DUI 3 years ago. He was working for me at the time, making deliveries. If it had become public knowledge, well, there would have been questions about whether he'd ever driven the delivery van while intoxicated." She swallowed hard. "He hadn't, but the suspicion alone would have been enough to ruin my business." Susan made sure the arrest report never made the local paper. In exchange, I became her personal wine supplier. Free of charge, of course. And when I gave Jeremy the envelope, Susan called me in a panic. Said if I didn't back her up, she'd make sure everyone knew about my brother, about the arrangement we had. Linda looked up, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I was a coward. You were protecting your family, your livelihood. Maybe? But at what cost?" She wiped at her eyes. "Anyway, it's all out now. I told the investigators everything. About the wine, about Susan's threats, about how she and Rick would host private dinners for contractors before town projects were even announced to the public. That must have been difficult," I said, and meant it. Linda nodded. "The wine shop is probably finished. Once this all comes out, who's going to want to do business with me?" "You'd be surprised," I replied. "Willow Creek has its flaws, but there's goodness here too. People understand being caught in an impossible situation." We sat in silence for a moment, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway the only sound. "Why did you do it, Evelyn?" Linda asked finally. "Stand up to them? You must have known there would be consequences." I considered the question carefully. I think I was tired of disappearing. After Tom died, I started to fade from this community, inch by inch. Some of it was my own withdrawal, my own grief, but some of it was deliberate. Susan and her circle gradually erasing me because I asked inconvenient questions, because I remembered how things used to be, because I wasn't useful to them anymore. The empty bag at the festival was just the final insult. I smiled faintly, the visible manifestation of what had been happening invisibly for years. Linda nodded slowly. "I understand that. The feeling of being erased." She stood, straightening her rumpled blouse. Thank you for listening. I'm not asking for forgiveness. You have it anyway, I interrupted gently. Her eyes widened in surprise. Just like that? Forgiveness isn't about erasing what happened. It's about refusing to let it determine what happens next. I rose as well. Tom used to say that. He was wiser than I am. I doubt that. Linda hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged me briefly. I'll see you around, Evelyn. If you'll still have me as a friend. I'd like that. After she left, I made a cup of tea and returned to my porch. The afternoon was fading toward evening, the air soft with approaching autumn. From my vantage point, I could see several houses along Maple Avenue, windows glowing as families began their evening routines. My phone buzzed with a text from Jeremy. Thought you should know. Formal. Charges being filed Monday. S&R both named. I set the phone down, absorbing the news. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, or vindication. Just a quiet certainty that some balance had been restored. Mrs. Patterson appeared at her mailbox across the street, waving when she spotted me. Evelyn, any chance you'll be at the community meeting tomorrow? They're discussing the fall festival. With everything going on, they need someone with experience to help reorganize. I waved back, considering. The last community meeting I'd attended had been 6 months ago, when my suggestion about expanding the high school scholarship program had been politely noted and promptly forgotten. I'll be there, I called back. Mrs. Patterson beamed. Wonderful. Oh, and will you be bringing your blueberry pies to the bake sale this year? They were sorely missed at the Harvest Festival. A small private smile curved my lips. Yes, I believe I will. As twilight deepened into evening, I remained on my porch, watching as lights came on in houses, as stars appeared overhead, as Willow Creek settled into itself. The truth had rippled through our town like a stone dropped in still water, disturbing the surface, but ultimately clearing what had grown stagnant. There would be more revelations, more consequences. The investigation would uncover other shadows, other corruptions. Some friendships would fracture. Others might strengthen or be reborn. The community would have to rebuild, to redefine itself beyond the Whitmore's influence. And I would be there, visible and present. Not at the center. I had never sought that, but not at the margins either. Just here, in the place I had earned through 30 years of living and working and loving in this small, imperfect, beautiful town. I finished my tea and went inside, leaving the porch light on. Tomorrow would be another day in Willow Creek, and for the first time in a long while, I was looking forward to it. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of autumn day that feels like a gift. I woke early, a habit from decades of teaching that persisted into retirement. For a moment, I lay still, listening to the familiar sounds of my house, the soft tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of settling wood. This house had been my sanctuary for 30 years, but for the first time in a long while I felt eager to step beyond its walls. The community meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock at the town hall. I dressed with care, not in anything fancy, but in clothes that made me feel like myself. A cornflower blue blouse Tom had always liked, comfortable slacks, my mother's silver earrings. Looking in the mirror, I saw a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked brown hair, laugh, lines around her eyes, and a determined set to her mouth. Not invisible, not diminished, present. Main Street was busier than usual for a Saturday morning. People gathered in small clusters outside the Maple Street coffee shop, and on the benches in the square, their conversations hushed but animated. A few nodded as I passed. Others seemed to find the storefront suddenly fascinating. News of the impending charges against the Whitmores had clearly spread. The meeting room at Town Hall was already half full when I arrived. Familiar faces turned as I entered. Some welcoming, some wary, all curious. I chose a seat near the middle, not hiding at the back, but not claiming prominence either. Margaret from the bake sale committee immediately came to sit beside me. Evelyn, I'm so glad you're here. This whole situation is just, well, it's something, isn't it? It certainly is, I agreed, keeping my tone neutral. I want you to know, she lowered her voice, leaning closer. Many of us are, well, we're grateful for what you did. The HOA fees have been rising for years with nothing to show for it, and whenever anyone questioned anything, Susan would make them feel like they were being unpatriotic or something. Civic-minded, I suggested with a small smile. Exactly. Margaret patted my hand. Anyway, I saved you a spot on the bake sale committee, if you're interested. Before I could respond, Harold Winters, the acting mayor, called the meeting to order. A mild-mannered man in his 70s with thinning white hair and wire-rimmed glasses, Harold had an accountant's precision and a grandfather's gentle authority. "Good morning, everyone," he began, adjusting his glasses. "I know we're all aware of the situation involving Mayor and Mrs. Whitmore. While that matter proceeds through appropriate legal channels, our community's activities must continue. Today's agenda focuses on reorganizing committees for the fall festival." The meeting progressed with a bureaucratic efficiency that was oddly comforting. Committees were restructured, budgets reviewed, responsibilities reassigned. Throughout, there was an undercurrent of change, a new openness in discussions, voices speaking up that had previously been silent, questions being asked and genuinely considered rather than deflected. When the festival planning was complete, Harold cleared his throat. "Before we adjourn, there's one more item. The town council will need to appoint an interim ethics committee to review our governance procedures and financial controls. We're looking for community members with relevant experience and institutional memory." His gaze found mine. "Mrs. Carter, given your background on both the school board and HOA treasurer, would you be willing to serve?" The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. 6 months ago, even 1 week ago, this invitation would never have been extended. Now it felt like both an opportunity and a responsibility. "I would be honored," I said simply. Harold nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Excellent. Anyone else interested in serving should submit their names to the clerk by Wednesday." As the meeting adjourned, people approached me one by one, some to congratulate me on the committee appointment, others to ask if I'd help with festival preparations, a few simply to chat as if we were old friends, though we'd barely spoken in years. Mrs. Patterson linked her arm through mine as we left town hall. "The Fall Festival Committee is meeting at my house Thursday evening. Nothing formal, just planning sessions over. Coffee and cake. You'll come, won't you?" "I'd like that," I said, meaning it. The walk home felt different somehow. I noticed details I'd overlooked for years, the intricate ironwork on the fence around the old courthouse, the way sunlight dappled through the maple trees, the cheerful window boxes still bright with late-season flowers. Willow Creek had always been beautiful, even when its social undercurrents were toxic. At the corner of Elm and Maple, I ran into Jeremy Knox, off-duty in jeans and a flannel shirt. His face brightened when he saw me. "Miss C, I heard you were at the meeting. How'd it go?" "Surprisingly well," I admitted. "I've been appointed to the interim ethics committee." Jeremy's grin widened. "Perfect. If anyone can help straighten things out, it's you." He fell into step beside me. "Listen, I wanted you to know, the state attorney's office is impressed with how organized your documentation was. Said it made their job a lot easier. All those years of grading papers," I said dryly. "You learn to appreciate thorough documentation." He laughed, then grew serious. "The Whitmores are leaving town. Did you hear? Rick's brother has a lake house upstate. They're headed there tomorrow." The news settled strangely in my chest. Not triumph, but a kind of hollow relief. Running away won't help their case. No, but I can't say I'm sorry to see them go. The atmosphere around here already feels lighter. He glanced at me. "Are you okay with all this? It's a lot of change, fast." "I'm fine, Jeremy. Change was overdue in Willow Creek." He nodded thoughtfully. "Well, for what it's worth, my mom says you should come to Sunday dinner sometime. She's always had a soft spot for you, even though she was terrified of your pop quizzes back in the day." The invitation warmed me. Jeremy's mother, Diane Knox, had been politely distant since Tom's death, one of many former friends who had gradually drifted into Susan's orbit. "I'd like that," I said. "Tell her I still remember her apple butter recipe. Best in the county." We parted at my front walk, Jeremy heading toward downtown, me toward the sanctuary of my porch. The day felt full somehow, not with events, but with connections restored, with possibilities opening. Inside, the house welcomed me with its familiar quiet. I made lunch, a simple sandwich eaten at the kitchen table while reading a mystery novel. Afterward, on impulse, I called my niece in Richmond. "Aunt Evie," Sarah exclaimed, her voice bright with surprise. "I was just thinking about you. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I assured her. "I just wanted to hear your voice. Tell me about the children." For the next hour, I listened to stories about my great-niece's soccer triumphs and my great-nephew's fascination with dinosaurs. Sarah's voice grew concerned near the end. Are you sure everything's all right, Aunt Evie? You've been so distant lately. Had I been? Perhaps I had withdrawn more than I realized, not just from Willow Creek, but from family too. Actually, things are changing here in interesting ways. I'll tell you all about it when you visit. We'll come up next weekend, Sarah promised. The kids miss you, and so do I. After we hung up, I sat for a long moment, feeling the gentle shift in my world. Not just the external changes in Willow Creek, but something internal too, as if a window had been opened in a stuffy room, letting in fresh air and light. The phone rang again. It was Linda Grace. Evelyn, she began without preamble. I've been thinking about what you said, about not letting the past determine what happens next. Yes? I'm considering selling the wine shop. Her voice strengthened with each word. Starting fresh, maybe a small cafe instead, something simpler. But I'd need help with the business plan, someone with a good head for numbers and organization. I might know someone, I said, smiling to myself. When would you like to talk about it? As the afternoon mellowed toward evening, I worked in my garden, clearing spent blooms to make way for fall planting. The earth was cool and damp beneath my fingers, alive with possibility. A garden was always changing, always in process. Death and renewal, endings and beginnings intertwined. Like Willow Creek itself, like me. Sunday passed quietly. Church in the morning, reading in the afternoon, a long phone call with an old teaching colleague who'd moved to Florida years ago. Monday, however, brought the storm I'd been anticipating. Mayor and wife charged in corruption probe, the Willow Creek Gazette's headline declared. Below, in smaller but still prominent type, investigation sparked by documents from retired teacher. My phone began ringing at 7:30. I let it go to voicemail. The first knock came at 8, Mrs. Patterson bearing cinnamon rolls and questions. I invited her in, served coffee, and answered what I could without compromising the ongoing investigation. I always thought there was something not quite right about those two, she confided, leaning forward as if sharing a secret. Too perfect, you know. And Susan was always so concerned about appearances. Now we know why. By 10, 3 more neighbors had stopped by, ostensibly to check on me, but really to gather first-hand information. I received them all with the same calm politeness, neither encouraging gossip nor shutting down genuine concern. When the doorbell rang again just before noon, I opened it to find Alyssa Chen, the young reporter from the Gazette, notebook in hand. Mrs. Carter, I was hoping for a comment on today's article. You're being credited with bringing this situation to light. I considered refusing, but something in her earnest expression gave me pause. She reminded me of countless students I'd taught, eager, determined, hoping to make a difference with words. You can come in, I said finally. But this isn't an exposé. I'm just a citizen who believed in accountability. We sat in the, living room where I'd hosted Susan and Linda just days before. Alyssa perched on the edge of the sofa, pen poised above her notebook. What made you decide to come forward with the documents? She asked. I chose my words carefully. Willow Creek has been my home for 30 years. I've taught its children, served on its boards, believed in its potential. When I saw patterns of behavior that undermined the community's trust and resources, I felt obligated to act. And the incident at the Harvest Festival? The empty bag? Did that play a role? So she knew about that. News traveled fast in small towns. It was a catalyst, perhaps. A public manifestation of attitudes that had been developing for years. Alyssa wrote quickly, then looked up. Some people are calling you a whistleblower. Others say you had a personal vendetta against the Whitmores. How do you respond to that? I'm neither hero nor villain, I said simply. Just someone who believed the truth mattered. She seemed to consider this, tapping her pen against her notebook. The charges are serious: embezzlement of HOA funds, manipulation of town contracts, abuse of office. If convicted, Mayor Whitmore could face significant penalties. That's for the courts to decide. Do you regret your role in this? The disruption to the community? The question gave me pause. Did I regret it? The upheaval? The divided loyalties? The harsh spotlight of public scrutiny? I regret that it was necessary, I said finally. I regret that those in positions of trust abused that trust. But I don't regret standing up for what's right, even when it was difficult. Alyssa nodded. something like respect flickering in her expression. One last question, Mrs. Carter. What happens now? For you? For Willow Creek? I looked past her to the window, where autumn sunlight streamed through the maple leaves, casting dappled shadows on my living room floor. Now we rebuild. We learn from this. We create the community we want to live in, one based on transparency, fairness, and genuine care for one another. After Alyssa left, promising to quote me accurately, I made a sandwich and ate it on the porch, watching the quiet rhythm of my neighborhood, mail being delivered, children returning from school, Mrs. Patterson watering her mums, life continuing, adapting to new realities. Around 3 o'clock, a car I didn't recognize pulled up in front of my house. A woman emerged, tall, elegant, with streaks of gray in her dark hair. It took me a moment to place her. Eleanor Whitmore, Rick's sister. We'd met at town functions over the years, exchanged pleasantries at school events when her children were younger, but had never been close. She approached my porch with a straight back and determined step. I rose to meet her, unsure what to expect. "Evelyn," she said, her voice clipped but not hostile. "May I speak with you?" "Of course." I gestured to the chair beside mine. "Would you like some tea?" "No, thank you." She sat, arranging herself with practiced precision. "I won't take much of your time. I wanted to say, what you did took courage." Of all the reactions I'd anticipated, this was perhaps the last. "I'm sorry." Eleanor's smile was thin but genuine. "My brother and Susan have been problematic for years. The family has tried to intervene to rein them in. We failed." She looked out at the street, her profile sharp against the autumn light. The money, the status, the control, it became an addiction for them, and we enabled it by looking the other way. I wasn't sure how to respond. "I never intended to hurt your family, Eleanor." "I know." She turned back to me. "But sometimes pain is necessary for healing, like lancing a boil." She reached into her purse and withdrew an envelope, placing it on the small table between us. "This is for you." "What is it?" "A check for the Willow Creek Education Foundation. Anonymous, of course. But I wanted you to know it's coming from the right place. A small step toward restitution." I didn't touch the envelope. "That's generous, but it's not generosity, Evelyn. It's responsibility. My family name is now associated with corruption and betrayal of public trust. I can't change that, but I can try to balance the scales, in some small way." She stood, smoothing her tailored slacks. "The Whitmore family has been in Willow Creek for 4 generations. Some of us intend to remain, to rebuild our reputation through actions rather than appearances." As she turned to leave, I found my voice. "Thank you for coming, Eleanor." She paused, looking back. "No, thank you, Evelyn, for having the courage the rest of us lacked." I watched her drive away, the envelope still untouched on the table. Another ripple in the pond, another consequence I hadn't anticipated. The rest of the day passed in reflection. I prepared a simple dinner, answered emails from former colleagues curious about the news reports, and began organizing notes for the first ethics committee meeting. Outside, twilight settled over Willow Creek, stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky. My phone chimed with a text from Jeremy. "All okay? Press giving you trouble?" "I'm fine," I replied. "Just one interview. Quiet otherwise." "Good. Mom says dinner next Sunday, 5 p.m. She's making pot roast." I smiled at the screen. "Tell her I'll bring dessert." Later, as I prepared for bed, I stood for a long moment at my bedroom window, looking out at the neighborhood. Lights glowed in windows, televisions flickered behind curtains, lives unfolded in their private rhythms. The Whitmore's house stood dark and empty, a for sale sign already planted in the front lawn. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more adjustments, more rebuilding. The town would need to elect a new mayor. The ethics committee would begin its work. Committees would reorganize, priorities would shift, new voices would emerge while others faded, and I would be part of it all, not as a crusader or a revolutionary, but simply as Evelyn Carter, citizen of Willow Creek, who had chosen to stand in the light rather than disappear into the shadows. As I turned from the window, my gaze fell on the photograph of Tom on my nightstand. His kind eyes, his gentle smile frozen in time. "You would have done the same," I told him softly. "You always said truth matters, especially in small towns." I could almost hear his response, the quiet wisdom that had anchored our life together. Truth without compassion is just another kind of weapon, Evie. Remember that. I would. In the days and weeks ahead, as Willow Creek navigated this seismic shift, I would hold to both truth and compassion, accountability and understanding, justice and forgiveness. It was, after all, what Tom would have expected of me. What I now expected of myself. Tuesday morning, I woke to the sound of rain, a gentle autumn shower that misted my windows and brought the scent of damp earth through the screens. Perfect weather for beginnings, I thought, as I made my first cup of coffee and opened my planner. The day ahead was surprisingly full. Meeting with Linda about her cafe business plan at 10, lunch with Margaret to discuss the Fall Festival bake sale, and the first gathering of the Ethics Committee at 3. A week ago, my calendar had been mostly blank. Now, connection by connection, it was filling with purpose again. I dressed in a deep green sweater that Tom had given me for my 60th birthday, and comfortable slacks, adding a simple gold necklace. Nothing fancy, but put together. For too long after Tom's death, I'd fallen into the habit of invisibility, not just socially, but in how I presented myself. Plain clothes, minimal effort, as if announcing to the world that I was done being seen. No more. The Bell Street Cafe was busy when I arrived. Locals huddled over coffee and conversation, much of it likely centered on the Whitmores. Linda had claimed a corner table, spreadsheets and notebook at the ready. Her face brightened when she saw me. Evelyn, I wasn't sure if, well, with everything in the papers today, I said I'd be here. I smiled, settling into the chair across from her, and I meant it. For the next hour, we pored over her business plan, converting the wine shop into a small cafe with a curated selection of wines and local craft beers. Linda's eyes sparkled as she described her vision. Simple food, well prepared, a place where people can gather without pretension, community tables and comfortable chairs, books you can borrow while you eat. It sounds wonderful, I said, and meant it. A place Willow Creek needs. I'll need investors, she admitted, her enthusiasm dimming slightly. The conversion won't be cheap, and after everything, well, my reputation isn't exactly sterling right now. I may know someone who could help, I said, thinking of Eleanor Whitmore's envelope, still unopened on my desk at home. Let me make a call. Linda reached across the table, squeezing my hand. Why are you doing this, Evelyn? After how I treated you? Because everyone deserves a second chance, I said simply. And because I think your cafe will make Willow Creek a better place. That matters to me. Lunch with Margaret proved equally productive. The bake sale committee, freed from Susan's micromanagement, was reimagining the entire concept. We're thinking of a Tastes of Willow Creek theme, Margaret explained excitedly, showcasing family recipes passed down through generations, stories to go with each dish. Your blueberry pie would be perfect, didn't you? Once mentioned it was your grandmother's recipe? Great-grandmother's, I corrected, smiling at the memory. From Kentucky. She used lemon zest in the crust, an unusual touch back then. That's exactly what we want, the stories behind the food, the heritage of our community. Margaret leaned forward, her eyes bright. Susan always focused on presentation. Everything had to look perfect, be arranged. Just so. But we want substance, authenticity. Count me in, I said, raising my water glass in a small toast. To substance over style. The ethics committee meeting at Town Hall was more sobering. Harold Winters had appointed a diverse group. Myself, a retired accountant, a local attorney, the high school civics teacher, and Reverend Miller from the Methodist Church. Our task, review town. Governance procedures, recommend transparency measures, and draft ethical guidelines for all committees and boards. We need to restore trust, Harold emphasized, his expression grave, not just in our officials, but in our processes, in how decisions are made that affect everyone's lives. We worked diligently for 2 hours, identifying priority areas, assigning research tasks, and scheduling twice-weekly meetings. As we gathered our materials to leave, Reverend Miller touched my arm gently. This can't have been easy for you, Evelyn. Stepping forward, facing scrutiny. I considered his words carefully. It wasn't easy, but necessary things rarely are. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. The congregation has been divided about recent events. Some see justice served, others fear. For our town's reputation, I've been struggling with how to address it from the pulpit. Truth and compassion, I suggested. We need both right now. Exactly. His smile was warm. Would you consider speaking to my adult Sunday school class? Not about the specifics of the case, but about ethical citizenship, about the responsibility we all share in creating the community we want. The invitation surprised me. Before Tom's death, we'd been regular churchgoers, but I'd drifted away in the years since, another connection allowed to fade. I'd be honored, I said, realizing I meant it. By the time I walked home, the rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and glistening. The maple trees along my street blazed with autumn colors, their wet leaves brilliant against the gray sky. I breathed deeply, feeling a sense of alignment I hadn't experienced in years, as if the external world of Willow Creek and my internal landscape were finally in harmony again. The feeling persisted through the evening as I prepared a simple dinner, responded to emails, including one from Melissa Chen thanking me for the interview, with a link to her thoughtful article, and began drafting notes for the Sunday school talk. Around 8 o'clock, my doorbell rang. Jeremy Knox stood on my porch, still in uniform, his expression somber. "Evening, Miss C. Got a minute?" "Of course." I stepped back to let him in, a flicker of concern arising. "Is everything all right?" "Yes and no." He removed his cap, running a hand through his hair. "We got word that Rick Whitmore is planning to plead guilty to reduced charges, cooperating with the investigation." "I see." I led him into the living room, where we sat in our now familiar positions. Jeremy on the sofa, me in Tom's chair. "And Susan?" "That's the thing. She's contesting everything, claiming she was uninvolved, unaware. Her lawyer's already spinning a narrative that she was just the devoted wife, kept in the dark about financial matters." Something cold settled in my stomach. "But the evidence is strong for Rick's direct involvement, less clear-cut for Susan's." Jeremy leaned forward, his expression earnest. "The prosecutors are asking if you'd be willing to provide additional testimony, specifically about Susan's role in the HOA finances when you were treasurer, and about any direct threats or pressure she might have applied to you or others." I sat back, processing this. She was careful. Always. Implications rather than direct threats. Exclusion rather than confrontation. Linda Grace has come forward with specifics, so have 2 other business owners. But having your perspective would strengthen the case considerably. Even though I was the one who brought the initial evidence? Jeremy nodded. "Especially because of that. Your credibility is solid, Miss C. You've got no financial stake in this, no personal vendetta, just a citizen who stood up for what's right." I thought of Susan, her calculated cruelty, her manipulation of others, the empty bag that symbolized years of systematic erasure. And yet, beneath the anger I'd felt, there was also something like pity. What kind of emptiness? Drove someone to build their life around controlling and diminishing others? "I'll help however I can," I said finally, "but not out of vengeance, out of a desire for justice, for accountability. There's a difference." Jeremy's smile was gentle. "I know that. So does anyone who knows you." He stood, replacing his cap. "The state prosecutor will be in touch tomorrow. And Miss C, thank you for everything." After he left, I sat for a long time in the quiet of my living room, thinking about justice and mercy, about consequences and second chances, about the fine line between holding people accountable and allowing for redemption. Eleanor's envelope caught my eye, still unopened on my desk. I crossed to it, broke the seal, and examined the check inside. The amount was substantial, enough to fund several college scholarships, to expand the library's literacy program, to make a real difference in young lives. I placed it carefully back in the envelope. Tomorrow, I would discuss with Eleanor how best to direct this toward healing our community's wounds, not erasing the past, but creating a better future from its lessons. Outside, night had fallen completely. I stood at my window, looking out at the streetlights illuminating Maple Avenue, at the homes where my neighbors lived their complicated lives, at the town that had been my home for 3 decades. Willow Creek was changing. I was changing with it, and for the first time in years, both changes felt right. 1 month later, on a crisp Saturday in late October, Willow Creek held its fall festival. Maple Square blazed with autumn decorations, hay bales and corn stalks, pumpkins and gourds, ribbons and harvest colors. Children ran laughing between activity booths, their faces painted like cats and superheroes. Music drifted from the bandstand where the high school jazz ensemble played. I stood behind the community bake sale table, arranging plates of cookies and slices of pie. My blueberry pies, 3 of them this year, held a place of honor. each with a small card describing great-grandmother Carter's Kentucky origins and her secret lemon zest crust. Margaret had been right. The stories behind the food had captured people's imagination. All morning, residents had been sharing family recipes and the memories attached to them, creating connections through shared heritage. Miss C, Jeremy Knox approached, off-duty in jeans and a flannel shirt, his young daughter Lily skipping beside him. Save me a slice of that blueberry pie. Lily's been talking about it all week. I've got one set aside for you, I assured him with a wink to Lily, who beamed. How's your mother? I missed her at church last Sunday. Better. The physical therapy's helping her knee. She says to thank you for the casserole. It was just what the doctor ordered. His expression grew more serious. Heard from the prosecutor's office? I nodded. The plea deal is finalized. Rick got 3 years, most likely served at the minimum security facility upstate. Susan takes a suspended sentence, community service, and full restitution payments. I'd given my deposition 2 weeks earlier, a thorough account of my observations and experiences. In the end, Susan had accepted the deal rather than face trial. A pragmatic choice, if not exactly a moral awakening. Fair outcome, Jeremy said, though some folks think she got off easy. Justice isn't always about punishment, I replied. Sometimes it's about restoration, rebuilding what was broken. He smiled, understanding in his eyes. Speaking of rebuilding, have you seen Linda's Cafe? The renovation's coming along nicely. I was there yesterday. The community table is being installed next week. Thanks to Eleanor Whitmore's investment and guidance from the Small Business Association, Linda's Hearth Cafe was on track to open by Thanksgiving. I'd been helping with menu planning and the selection of books for the reading corner. Jeremy was called away by Lily's insistence on visiting the face-painting booth, and I returned to serving customers at the bake sale. The morning passed in a pleasant blur of conversations and connections. Former students stopping by to chat, neighbors sharing news, newcomers to town being welcomed and introduced. Around noon, Harold Winters, now officially elected as mayor to complete Rick's term, took the microphone at the Bawai bandstand. The crowd quieted as he spoke about community resilience, about the challenges Willow Creek had faced and the strength it had found in coming together. Today, I'm pleased to announce that the town council has unanimously approved the recommendations of our ethics committee, he said, nodding in my direction. These new guidelines for transparency, financial oversight, and inclusive governance will ensure that Willow Creek belongs to all its citizens, not just a select few. Applause rippled through the crowd. Over the past month, our committee had worked diligently, researching best practices, consulting with experts, and drafting policies that would stand the test of time. The work had been challenging, but deeply satisfying, a way to channel the pain of recent events into positive change. Additionally, Harold continued, I'm honored to introduce the inaugural recipients of the Willow Creek Future Leaders Scholarships, funded by a generous anonymous donation. 3 high school seniors took the stage, beaming with pride. Among them was Alyssa Chen's younger brother Michael, whose investigative journalism project on local government had earned him the top award. Eleanor Whitmore stood at the back of the crowd, a small smile playing at her lips as she watched the ceremony. We'd worked together to establish the scholarship fund, channeling her restitution money into opportunities for the next generation. The day continued with music and food, games, and conversation. As afternoon mellowed toward evening, I took a break from the bake sale, wandering through the festival with a cup of apple cider. The atmosphere was different from previous years, more relaxed, more inclusive, with new faces mingling among the familiar ones. Near the gazebo, I spotted Susan Whitmore's sister, Beth, helping her children select pumpkins. She caught my eye, hesitated, then approached. Evelyn, she said, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and determination. I wanted to apologize for how my family treated you, for not speaking up sooner. There's no need, I assured her. We all make choices based on what we think we can bear at the time. Susan is... She paused, searching for words. She's struggling, with the consequences, with the loss of status. But maybe, in time, it will be for the best, for her to find value beyond appearances and control. I hope so, I said sincerely. For her sake. Beth nodded, gratitude in her eyes. My children and I are staying in Willow Creek. It's our home too. I'd like them to know it can be a place of integrity and community. It can be, I agreed, if we all do our part to make it so. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across Maple Square, I found myself sitting on a bench near the bandstand, watching as the festival began its gentle transition toward evening activities. Sarah and her family would arrive tomorrow for their weekend visit, the guest rooms prepared, great-nephew Ethan's favorite dinosaur book stacked on the nightstand. Linda Grace spotted me and came to sit beside me, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "The cafe's sign was installed today," she announced. "Want to see a picture?" She showed me her phone, a beautiful wooden sign reading Hearth and Home Cafe, with "a place at the table for everyone," in smaller letters beneath. "It's perfect," I told her, squeezing her hand. "I couldn't have done it without you, Evelyn. Your faith in me, after everything. That's what community should be," I said simply. Believing in each other's better selves. Offering chances to begin again. As twilight deepened, lights came on around the square. Strings of warm bulbs zigzagging overhead, lanterns glowing from booth to booth. The high school choir took the stage for the final performance of the day, their young voices rising in harmony as they sang of home and belonging. Mrs. Patterson appeared at my side, slightly out of breath. "Evelyn, there you are. The judges have announced the bake sale winners. Your blueberry pie took first place. They're looking for you for the presentation." I laughed, genuinely surprised. "After all these years?" "Well," she winked, "Susan's not running the judging committee anymore, is she? Come on, they're waiting." As I walked toward the community table where the awards were being presented, I felt a gentle pressure on my shoulder, so familiar, so comforting, that for a moment I could almost believe it was Tom's hand, his presence beside me in this moment of quiet triumph. "This one's for you," I whispered to the evening air. "For us." The applause as I accepted the simple blue ribbon was warm and genuine. Not just for a pie, but for everything it represented. Resilience, tradition, the courage to stand in the light and be seen, even when it's easier to disappear into the shadows. Later, as I walked home under a canopy of stars, the blue ribbon tucked safely in my pocket, I thought about empty bags and full envelopes, about how sometimes you have to lose what you thought you wanted to find what you truly need, about how communities, like people, can lose their way but find it again if enough citizens care enough to speak truth and work for change. Willow Creek was healing, different, but perhaps better for having faced its shadows, and I had found my place within it once more, not as the quiet widow fading into invisibility, but as Evelyn Carter, teacher, neighbor, citizen, present and accounted for. At my front door I paused, looking back at the twinkling lights of the festival still visible in the distance. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys, its own opportunities to choose truth over comfort, connection over isolation. I was ready for all of it, because the truth is, we're never too old to begin again, never too wounded to heal, never too invisible to reclaim our rightful space in the world. Sometimes all it takes is the courage to place an envelope at someone's door, or to open an empty bag and recognize it for what it truly is, not an ending but a beginning.